The Sega CD version of Mortal Kombat was released sometime after the initial home versions of the game were released on Mortal Monday, September 13th, 1993. Advertised as being bigger, better, louder, and meaner than its lesser contemporaries, the Sega CD version of Mortal Kombat promised to have an arcade-quality soundtrack, solid graphics, and the bloody action you'd expect from a Mortal Kombat game. Did it deliver? No, it didn't. First of all, this isn't a bigger and better version of Mortal Kombat. This is just the Sega Genesis version with the arcade soundtrack playing on a CD, which I guess is somewhat loud, but not necessarily louder. So they lied about that too, which is pretty mean, but not necessarily meaner. That was lame. Never do that again, you jackass. God damn it. I suppose it shouldn't have been a surprise. Sega CD iterations of popular games of the time are just the same old game with the bundled gimmicks of grainy full motion video and CD quality music. Now, if you've played the Genesis version, then I'm pretty sure you've played this one because they're almost the exact same game. Solid control and good response. While the game functions nicely with a standard 3-button controller, you really need a 6-button controller to truly play the game the way it was meant to be played. The only major difference between the two versions, and quite possibly the most distracting feature between the Sega CD version and the Genesis version, is the barrage of load times that you have to deal with over the course of the game. The load times between matches, the load time between intermissions, and even Shang Tsung's individual morphs can be long to endure, and it's quite possibly the most crippling blow in an otherwise satisfactory fighting experience. Of course, if we wanted an otherwise satisfactory fighting experience, we'd pop in the Genesis cart instead. Crappy sound, but no load times. On the other hand, they did bring back the blood and fatalities proper to the main game without having a need for a hidden code. Now, the Genesis version of Mortal Kombat wasn't a great looking game. There were some colors and set pieces were missing, and whatever was retained didn't necessarily look all that great, either lacking detail or contrast or both. Unfortunately, the Sega CD version shows very little improvement. While they changed the health meter around so it somewhat resembles the arcade game, they didn't really do much to clean up or improve upon the visuals of the Genesis game. The only real positive, like I said before, is that the blood and fatalities are available from the very beginning without having to insert a code or anything similar. Which is faint praise at best, but at least you were getting the violent content that Mortal Kombat was known for at the time, in its full glory. As a bonus, they did toss in an extremely low-resolution video of the so-called infamous Mortal Kombat commercial, featuring a bunch of random kids, some weird techno tunes, and this is the best part, clips from the Super Nintendo version of the game. Nice. Yeah, looking back, this isn't really worth bragging about, especially nowadays when even a poorly rendered YouTube video possesses better video quality than the Sega CD's offerings, but I digress. Well, if there's one thing that this version has definitely improved over its Genesis counterpart, it's the sound. With the use of CD audio, Sega CD owners can enjoy a few tracks from the arcade game itself in very crisp quality. In addition to that, most of the announcer dialogue that was missing from the Genesis version has been retained here. Of course, some of the music tracks are in the wrong place, but otherwise it's still a good effort and an improvement for the most part over its 16-bit something Genesis version. I lost track, but I digress. In terms of all the versions of Mortal Kombat released back in the day, I prefer the version that appeared on the PC, which played great and sounded good in spite of the MIDI soundtrack, but I digress in that count. After having played this Sega CD version recently, I have to say that Mortal Kombat CD isn't impressive at all. They just slapped the Genesis version on it and gave it a CD soundtrack with tracks from the arcade game, along with a really crappy version of a commercial that seems to be a big deal for some reason. There isn't really much of a notable improvement over the other game. The loading times are actually distracting for the most part, and the fact that the arcade blood and fatality is the standard as opposed to a hidden feature isn't really much to celebrate about. Still, the additional audio upgrade is noteworthy if nothing else, and there was some effort to make this more like the arcade game. It's just too bad it wasn't enough of an effort to make it an actual improvement over its cartridge counterparts. Ultimately, if you already have the Sega Genesis version of Mortal Kombat, then there's no real reason to go for the Sega CD version, as it's not only the same game, but the Sega CD's obscene loading times make it a notch below what's on the old Mega Drive. Trust me, The 5 seconds it takes to input the bloat code at the beginning of the game is a small price to pay for a smooth playing Mortal Kombat experience, something that the Sega CD version fails to offer. While this might have been a decent addition to Mortal Kombat back in the day to those who didn't game on their PCs, nowadays there's a wide bunch of means to play Mortal Kombat, and all of them are preferable to the Sega CD edition. This one's for fans and collectors only.